Been posting on our Facebook page about a local story involving those two little children who drowned in their neighbor's pool. Their parents were not home at the time. The children were 6 and 3 years old, and look at them, little angels there. We just learned about a case in Columbia County where police say a mother left her 1-year-old and 3-year-old home alone while she went to work. So these cases are raising questions about how young is too young, and how will you know when your child is ready to stay home alone. Joining us live this morning is Dr. Vandanya Bide. She is a pediatrician who works at Mayo Clinic, joining us to discuss the big phrase, the big catchphrase that was coined back in the, what was it, late 70s, early 80s, was Latch Key Kids. Kids who were home alone, usually after school. Do we have any estimates on how many of them there are in this country?
Stacey, at least 1 out of 3 adolescents is a latchkey kid, will come home, have a key, and be alone after school until their parent comes home.
But usually it's not a 6 or a 3-year-old.
Right.
Like we saw in this particular case. Is there a golden age, according to you, who's a pediatrician, in which kids can be left home alone?
Well, of course, it depends on the maturity level of the individual child. But in general, we say that somewhere between the ages of 11 and 12 is reasonable to consider to have your child home alone.
Are girls more mature than boys? Do you think we can leave them home alone earlier than maybe a boy?
Well, again, I think it's really the individual more than the gender. We know that girls do tend to mature earlier, but really it's more what that individual child is. And in some cases, as early as 4th grade, it may be reasonable. But again, depending on the maturity level of the individual child.
And how long should kids this age be left home alone? Is it okay to be left for 5 hours at a stretch, or maybe the parent works until late in the evening?
Sure. I think in general, we suggest no more than 3 hours at a time. Again, it depends on how many neighbors are available. Is there any emergency situations that the child can either meet with a relative or a neighbor if the parent is going to be there longer. It really is the individual case. Can the parent call in, which is what I always recommend. The parent should call in and check in with the child every day when the child is alone. And
you actually, research shows that kids are a lot more anxious than you might suspect as a parent when they are left home alone.
Right.
Even though you think, oh, they're, just playing video games, they're happy, they're okay. That may not be the case.
Sure. I think that children don't always express it, but I think in general we know that they may be more anxious and worried when they're left alone than we would expect. So I think it's important that we talk to the children, have a trial run, go over a number of scenarios that may occur while they're at home alone.
We've got a graphic actually showing some of the questions that you should be doing in your trial run. For example, what would happen if someone came to the door? I mean, these are all possibilities when your kid's home alone.
Right. And I think you have to talk to the child. So what's acceptable in your household? For example, is it acceptable to answer the door at all? I think a lot, unless you really know who's going to be at the door, unless that person is checked in beforehand, says they're coming to the home, I would suggest not answering the door at all. And a lot of times, kids feel like, well, that's being rude, or maybe it's the mailman. But really, I really suggest that you not allow the doors to be open when the child is home alone.
And also when somebody calls, you don't want them to say, my parents aren't here.
Right, right.
Just real quickly, if you have established that your child is mature enough to be left home alone, as a parent, you may want to set ground rules like, hey, you got to do your chores.
Right, right. So beforehand, and write it down so there's no misunderstanding. How long, if the child's able to watch TV, how long can he or she watch television? Are there any chores that need to be done before the parent gets home? Can there be visitors? Set the ground rules in advance, put the emergency numbers up, the contact numbers that the parent can be reached at, and set everything written and go over it before the first time you leave your child alone.
You just never know what might happen when you're not there. Dr. Vandanya Bide, thank you so much for being with us this morning.